Howdy, folks. Happy Monday. Apparently, it's not very happy in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area because they're getting bombed with live turkeys. Film at 11. No, just kidding. But it was some nice weather for July 4th. Lots of illegal fireworks in Buffalo. And we'll start with some illegal pre-show stuff with Russ.
Well, I think it's interesting. Earlier today, and I guess this has been out since June 25th, but I never saw it, Vanity Fair did an article on Rick Wakeman, who, for those who don't know him, a really great keyboardist from the 70s who still plays today and has played on a lot of monumental albums with a lot of other artists besides Yes. And so Bowie, he actually was in Abbey Road Studios playing a Mellotron. Cat Stevens, a lot of big artists. But the interesting thing is, one of the things that you read when you first started is that he went broke. Like, he literally was on a park bench and he was homeless. And, you know, he had a fleet of Rolls Royces. He was like, when albums were selling like crazy and royalties were king, he was raking it in. But clearly he had a lifestyle that was too much to handle. Now he's going to put out his 122nd album, which, if you think about that, that's unbelievable. What's interesting is I've seen the guy play, and he really is. You don't want to shoot. You shouldn't put him just as a rocker because he was a classically trained pianist.
Yeah.
And so, like, even in this article, Elton John said when he worked on like the Madman Across the Water album, he said, I realized then I would just stick to piano because he realized he can't play in that guy's league, but Wakeman can play in anybody's piano league. He just chose to go more synthesizer. So it's a really good article, and you know, considering Wakeman's 71, I think it's a nice thing to read and realize all that this guy's been through.
Now, just as a little amusement here, I was going to send a picture of Rick Wakeman to you guys as a little GIF in our direct message chat on Twitter, and I type in Rick Wakeman on Twitter, and this Twitter should be shot for this. Here are the first 4 pictures that popped up when I typed in the full name, Rick Wakeman. First one, Rick Astley.
Ooh.
Okay. Second one.
He's been rickrolled.
He's been rickrolled, yes. Second one, Ravishing Rick Rude.
Oof.
Doing his stripper dance.
Yeah.
Third one, Buffalo's own Rick James. Who I get warmer. who, by the way, I have visited his grave, and there was a bottle of Hennessy on his gravestone. And finally, this one for you, Anthony, because I'm sure you love him so much. Former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santoro. No comment. Okay, Russ, continue on with the pre-show.
No, it's just funny. Actually, if I knew you needed a Wakeman picture that bad, I actually have a bunch. But you know, I've met the guy. He's really aloof and humble, but funny. If you want to see something funny, go and find on YouTube his speech for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's a hoot. Yeah. And now apparently he does like stand up and music together because he realized that people like hearing his story. So it's nice. It's a nice thing that he doesn't have to retire, that he's making a lot of money again. And you know, these are the kind they don't make guys like this anymore. Like, I don't want to be that guy that says that, but nobody who came out in the 90s is going to ever like act this way. And it's just, you know, it's like a bygone era, especially of a guy from England, you know, that's the other part.
Yeah, all you need to know about that is that Bill Bruford, who was standing behind him, and Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson from Rush, who inducted or induced them, they were cracking up when he was talking. So it was hilarious. I would go to YouTube and look at that. Russ, there are some rest in pieces in the chat for the late great Charlie Daniels, who passed away.
It was my first concert at Nassau Coliseum, and that's all I have to say on it. I am not a fan of Charlie the Man.
Okay. All right, we'll get started here because we will lead into we talked about the pre-show, so we'll talk about it. Start the show. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Monday, July 6th, 2020.
I'm Anthony.
Sorry. I'm Anthony. Sorry, Jan.
Russ Cohen from Sports Island.
Very good.
And I'm Michael Agello, and I got the date right. And this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com.
It's a low bar.
This weekend, I mean, last night about 7 o'clock was just a blizzard of info. I mean, it was basically, it must have popped up on the NHL media site, and everybody, I swear to God, Chris Johnston, Elliot Friedman, Bob McKenzie, and Pierre LeBrun all have carpal tunnel to this morning after what they were pumping out in terms of information, because the memorandum of understanding appears in place. It sounds like the CBA will be voted on this week. All the particulars of the return to play plan were put out there, and we won't go through all of it in terms of bullet points, but just as an overview, we'll go around the horn here, but to see what you guys think or what stood out to you in terms of intriguing situations for the first with the return to play. Russ, you first.
Well, before I get into their return to play,
right.
I think it's important to talk about Major League Baseball's return to play, because if you want to see successful, you could look at the NHL and NBA. And if you want to see not successful, you look at Major League Baseball. And a lot of it has to do with like aligning yourself with the right companies, testing companies and such. Right now, Major League Baseball is in a quandary because, like, Sean Doolittle had a great little Zoom chat today because he's like, we can't even practice today because I got tested on Friday. Those results haven't come back in, and they tested me again. And he goes, how could I even know how I am if I don't even know how I am from the Friday test? And that happens to like 4 teams in that league. We're not hearing about the same difficulties with the NHL. So I think that is a real plus. What I'm surprised at is that the NHL is using the word bubble, because I don't think it's going to be as strict as the NBA. Now, I saw the rule about going out to bars, and that's fine. I mean, I get that. But I still don't think it's going to be as strict as the NBA one. As an example, ESPN, I was watching earlier, and a reporter that's been down there has literally been quarantined in her room for 14 days, only going across the lobby in the hotel just to get a test. And that's it. Hasn't been out of the hotel at all. I don't think the NHL is going to operate exactly that way, but I was surprised that all of a sudden they were going to use the word bubble, because they never used it all along. So that caught my eye a little.
Anthony?
Certainly some of the phrasing, certainly they're now de-emphasizing the name. They don't want us to say Hub City now.
Right.
What was the exact phrase? There was
Phase 4 something.
Phase 4 something zone.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
but we're all going to say Hub City. We are.
Everyone's going to say Hub City, and we're all going to say bubble hockey.
Right. Pretty
much. So, I mean, certainly some of the what almost sounded like rushing for communication last night, and looking at, initially Bob McKenzie's initial tweets about, and Jan picked up on this immediately with regards to the date on everything about, July 7th being literally, a 2-day window. And then a couple hours later, McKenzie, of course, clarified and said basically on phase 3 and phase 4, they want to opt out penalty free. That's 3 days after the ratification vote, which again, I think is extremely important because you would have probably had a few more opt-outs than you think with that kind of there have been players who would have been very uncomfortable with that kind of rush.
And coincidentally, Anthony, the 13th is the day that the phase 3 begins. So it only makes sense that they would give them until that date to make their decision of whether to opt out or not. So, you're not going to be pushed and rushed through. Now you've got a week. The vote's going to happen, and then these players are going to have to decide, Jan. And I mean, I don't know if I expect as many players in the NHL to take the option that we've seen David Price and Zimmerman and a number of baseball players do, because
basketball.
I think that, I mean, the plan is 87 pages. So it looks like the NHL did their due diligence here in terms of making sure every T was crossed and every I was dotted to try to do the best to guarantee these players their health as much as they possibly can.
So a couple of things. So in terms of the baseball thing, I mean, I tweeted it beforehand, right? So the fact that everything is in Utah and they're using the one location in Utah has caused a lot of problems in terms of, one, the shipping, has been part of the issue. Two, the flights to get there, because I've been to Utah, is not an inordinate amount. You would almost think they would be better off going with regional-based approaches where you have it in, Midwest and the Southeast and North, et cetera. And that way it reduces the shipping time and you have more options in terms of delivering things. In terms of the protocol document, Major League Baseball had a pretty robust protocol document as well. The problem is, as you've seen some of the comments, is the transitional period between when that agreement was signed and getting into camp was a much shorter window than what the NHL had in terms of the start dates, partly because they're condensing the 60-game schedule into a much shorter span of time, which has resulted in this. Mike mentioned in terms of the opt-outs, I think we'll get it. We'll get a couple per team, maybe, in the NHL. I mean, obviously today Nick Markakis opted out for baseball. He mentioned Price. He mentioned Zimmerman. Yesterday, as you guys saw, I was tweeting a lot, and I kind of tried to put a lot of the bullets in my blog from yesterday because there was, as Mike said, it was going fast and furious there for several hours in terms of the info. The one thing I do find that's most interesting beyond whatever has been written seems to be the level of cooperation and collaborativeness between the two sides. Is something that we haven't seen in a lot of the sports. Now, granted, Brian Lawton tweeted this the other day. He's expecting the vote to be relatively close, almost as close as maybe the NFL one. And we talked about it then. That margin was razor thin in terms of the vote, in terms of pros and cons, in terms of the protocol and the CBA getting voted in. I don't know if it'll be as close now, but clearly the level of animosity that appeared to exist between the two sides, and we all were talking, next year we thought there could be a lockout or a strike because of the fact that the two sides seem to be so far apart. The good news is they've kind of put aside those disagreements and come together to try to find an agreement that works for both sides. Granted, there's still going to be a lot of challenges, and all of this is going to be iterative, and all the best laid plans of mice and men may go awry, as I wrote, is you're going to have a lot of things that, as much as you've written, they're going to be things that we haven't thought of that they're going to need to try to modify as camp goes on. But the good news is that both sides appear to be on the same page, at least starting off initially.
I think something that Anthony said is once it's ratified, then I think we'll see the opt-outs. I think there are guys that are holding back right now.
Right.
And I think the same way that Jan just said, hey, once Markakis saw that this guy opted out and that guy opted out, you're going to get that same sort of thing in the NHL too. I just think they're waiting until after the vote.
And Lawton may be right that the vote is close, but the difference is that we talked about this when the NFL vote came around. The NFL players were getting screwed. And it was basically the way the NFL did it was they boosted the pay of the guys who were the rank and file guys, and the star players were the ones who got pissed off. Yep. In this instance, I think that the PA has kept a lot of players, including not only just the rank and file, but star players. They all have had their hand in this. So I think that there's going to be less of a problem in terms of some sort of disjointed opinion from the group. I think that, do I think it'll pass? Yes. Do I think it'll be 95-5? No, it'll probably be 60-40 or 65-35. And there'll be an amount of people, an amount of players who are not happy with the agreement. But I think both sides have negotiated a situation here where neither one of them got everything that they wanted and they gave up something. So it's like a typical CBA. There's something for everybody.
Now, one thing, Mike, the NBA finally seems to be listening to people like me saying, hey, you should hire people that could stay in the bubble and clean rooms that way. I didn't get that feeling from the NHL other than they're only going to do it once every 3 days. But it doesn't matter how many days you do it. If those people are going on the outside, unless you're testing them when they come back in and you're waiting for them to clean the room, you still have a potential issue there. So I think things like that are probably going to get cleaned up. I mean, we should say, God forbid, these guys just had to clean up their own rooms, and then you would solve the problem 100%. But clearly they're not going to do that. So I know that sounds crazy because we all do it in real life. But also Mike had brought up something to me over the weekend, and that is like when we see the morning skates, these guys usually get some fruit and whatever, and I guess that stuff's going to get delivered to them and be left outside their door. But that's still not going to stop players from going into the local Starbucks that's in the hotel and whatever. And like I was telling Mike, when I was in the business, you think hotels are ready for full occupancy. And at times they are, but they're not ready for it all at once. And that's the problem when you have people like this in a hotel. Like, as an example, one time we had a group check-in and we were like, oh, yeah, when's everybody coming? And they said, oh, in a few hours. And we were like, okay, is it staggered? Yes. So, we put on extra staff. Well, they all came in at once, and it was like a 2-hour backup. Now, that's not going to happen in that hotel, but what will happen in that kitchen is when they're ordering, if everybody sort of gets in at the same time, orders the same time and everything, there's going to be things to iron out that this hotel has no idea how to deal with until it starts happening. And those are things the NHL really can't foresee. Those are like operational things that are going to come up.
Now, the NHL released a statement today. Now, before I talk about that, I don't think that there's going to be any shaming of players if they test positive. I mean, one of the things the NHL was clear about is that nobody is going to be specifically, they're not going to say so-and-so has COVID. They're not going to, they're respecting the HIPAA laws. I know there's an equivalent law in Canada. Austin Matthews got out. That was because of the good reporting of Steve Simmons. So that, they're going to try their best not to allow, but, some of them are going to get out. But I do think that when stories come out like what came out over the weekend about the St. Louis Blues players, when you find out that these guys were at a bar in suburban St. Louis and that there was a outbreak there, then I think there will be some shaming, because if you want to play, you cannot go out to a friggin' bar. You can't. You're going to have to, practice some good sense and not do what you normally do. Otherwise, you're putting everybody at risk. And that's
young, Mike. And if it's not against the law, you could rationalize anything. And I think that's why you saw some of that happening. But the other thing, there is one problem with the NHL system the way it is. They're not going to tell you who has COVID, but all of a sudden when reporters notice that 3 players aren't at practice and the coach isn't going to remark at why they're not there, they could have a hangnail, but we're all going to assume they have COVID. And that's a problem with communication that's going to occur.
And the same thing in Major League Baseball, right? I mean, there is a COVID IL, even if you're not put on it. If you're not in camp or with your team and you don't see any kind of injury, the likelihood and expectation is that the person has COVID, even though it's not going to be directly reported. But you have seen lately that certain players have told their teams they can announce it, like Scott Kingery for the Phillies, Luis Arias from the Brewers, and a couple of other guys. They have formally come out and told their teams they can announce it just to remove any doubt associated with what the illness is.
And it sounds, Anthony, like one of the things that they're sort of laying out there. Say, for example, somebody gets hurt in a game, they get concussed, and they have to go to a hospital. There's a procedure now. If it's concussion, obviously there's a 7-day protocol. So, but say it's a finger injury, they have to have X-rays. They could do X-rays at the arena, but if they need to go for an MRI or something like that, and they go to a hospital, then that sets in motion a procedure where these players have to test negative for a certain amount of days to get back to their team. So a hangnail could cost a guy being able to play 2 or 3 games in a series because they have to go through that procedure. And that's
but this is this is the trade. This is the scenario that everybody's being obviously faced with in this regard. So yeah, it's going to be really really interesting how this all works out, especially if we're in the midst of the series.
Well, let me ask you guys this too, because this came up on ESPN for baseball, and it was I think it was Jessica Ramirez. They were asking her, hey, what if they had to cut the season short? What if they had to just get right to the playoffs and everything? And she got to the point where she said, I think they would even get to the point where they would just announce who had the 2 best records and go to like a 5-game World Series. And I don't think that that's what Major League Baseball is thinking. No. But I think if we were all thinking that could happen in this, we would all not want them to have this opportunity to even try, because I don't want to see a Stanley Cup that's not 7 games, and I don't want to, and I wouldn't want to see it rush to the point where we're just doing it to get it done now, because I think you do lose. I know it's a tough era, but I do think you would lose all the gravitas that the Stanley Cup brings. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I would have less of a problem with them shutting it down again if there's a mass infection than them than trying to like truncate everything and rush it through. I mean, then that's bastardizing it. It really is. So it's like, I mean, I don't want the Stanley Cup final to be best of 5 because we gotta get it done before the wave hits. No, it's either going to be 7 games or you shut it down. And if you have to shut it down for a couple weeks and then finish it when the wave passes, okay, fine. But no, it needs to be the way it is. Otherwise, it's definitely going to have an asterisk.
I mean, I'll agree with Mike. I mean, I think that you need to try to play out the season as best as you can. Going with a truncated approach or just taking teams with the best records, not going through the extended playoffs is really not the direction in which they want to go. And in that case, they may just decide to cancel it, even though the goal here was clearly to try to get themselves to a Stanley Cup champion.
Now, the NHL released an update that they're doing, I think, every week now, and they did 1,400 tests this past week, and according to the results, 23 players have been confirmed positive. Now, that's 1,400 tests, multiple on each player. I think the list of players is about a little less than 400, and I guess when it gets to the 24 teams, it'll be up to, I think, up to 700 tests.
I mean, you think about it, just those amount of tests, even if they're getting a discount on it, probably costing them over $100,000 just for those tests.
Right, but it's at the point now, Russ, where they're mitigating the losses.
Yeah.
So they, it's
I just want people to understand, like, because I think they expect leagues to just absorb everything, and these are real costs. Like these are, this is big money. And
it's not as simple as a pregnancy test or as testing your blood sugar if you're diabetic. This is like you have to if they're doing a swab, a nasal swab or a throat swab, and then they're sending it again to this place in Utah, and then probably the results get emailed back to the team.
I don't think they're using Utah. Baseball is. I don't know where the NHL is sending theirs, honestly.
Right. But, okay, so now the CBA, I think that there's some encouragement, and we're going to have Shane Malloy on the show tomorrow, and we're going to talk more about this, but some of the things that I saw of course, I'm looking at things from the Leaf perspective, but, talking about the entire league. But for teams, let's just say this, the 35 and over contract has really been a thorn in a lot of teams' side over the last few years. Russ, was the LeCavier deal a 35 and over?
I think it was.
Okay.
Yep.
We all know Patrick Marleau's was, and what the Leafs had to do to get that contract off their books. They had to give up a first round pick. The Stefan Robida deal, we all remember, who played 1 year. He signed at 37 years old, and then they had to banish him to Robida Island. They weren't even a cap team at that point, but they had to invent a creative way, basically, saying, well, he can't play anymore. It's the 2 broken legs he had. He can't play anymore, so he's going to be on IR, or the Marian Hossa situation. There are all these creative ways that the 35 and over contracts didn't count. Now that shell game is over with, because now if the player decides they're going to retire, the cap hit drops off with them. The only exception to that is if they front load the deal, then there's still cap ramifications. But if the deal is like a flat deal, like it's 3 years, $9 million, $3 million every year, that will wash off if the player retires. If it's backloaded, it would wash off. But if it's front loaded, where they give them $7 million of the or $6 million in the first year, and then $3 million over the last 2 years, that's not going to fly. So they're looking at ways to not allow that cap circumvention, and I think that's a good thing. What do you think, Jan? You first, while Russ is fixing his life.
So there are a couple things. So if you just think back of a very recent contract, right? Look at Ilya Kovalchuk about a year or so ago, right? The whole piece where the rumor was originally the Rangers are going to be interested. The big consternation was because it would be an over 35 contract. Would he make it to the end of the contract? And granted, what happened with LA, right? They kind of found a taker. They got rid of him, and then he was able to be signed and then traded. And that big reason why a lot of teams shied away from him is because he wanted 3 years, not to 2 years. And if he did retire, you get hit with that cap hit associated with the contract on your overall cap figure. Now, as you said, they get with them getting rid of it, right? And it's interesting that the deals can be flat or ascending. I just think that's kind of interesting because, as you said, it does open up the market for another level and class of player who in the past you might not have signed because of the fear of now getting stuck with the cap hit. So what that does do is, even though the cap's staying flat, you do have a little bit more wiggle room associated with it if you sign one of these guys and changes your mindset a bit in terms of the players you might be targeting in free agency.
The only thing, honestly, I wouldn't sign anybody 37 or over. I don't care who they are. The only exception I might make is a Crosby or a McDavid. That's about it. I just wouldn't do it because all they're doing with this is guaranteeing that GMs are going to get stuck with deals down the road. That's what this is going to guarantee, because now there's no reason for them to stay away from it. And they're going to make the argument that, well, he'll be fine at least for 2 of the 4 years of this deal. And they're not going to be. With the speed of the game, with the speed of this game, the average player is almost in trouble by the time they hit 31. So how many players do you really think can play 35 and over that you're going to want to sign for any kind of money?
Well, what's missing here is it has to be a mutual agreement. It has to say, okay, I'm going to retire, and the team will agree, obviously. But if the team says, well, we want you to retire, if the player doesn't want to retire, they're stuck.
Right. So that's what's going to happen.
Now, for like an example, like a Leaf example, is Jason Spezza. They're both on the same page. The Leafs signed him to a league minimum contract, 1-year deal last summer. That they did it because he's 35 and over. They mutually want to sign a new deal. They're probably going to go year by year, and most of these in most of these instances, these players are going to go year by year because there could be a drop off at that advanced age. But if there's an older player who wants that security and wants to decide at the end of each year whether he wants to retire or not, there's no negative here, because if he decides, then that money is wiped off. If he decides, of course, both sides have to be on the same page, but I don't see much of a negative here unless there's a dispute. And that's
again, let's bring up Ilya Kovalchuk, who clearly, if you ask him to retire, he's not going to.
Right.
Is he? I mean, we all know that. Is he worth it? He had 26 points in 46 games. He had 10 goals. Like, unless you're getting that guy for $1 million, it's just not worth it, because there's going to be a year, and it's probably next year or the year after, where he gets even less than that. And then what does he do for your team? It's not like Trevor Linden, where you could say, all right, he took on another role and he gutted it out, and he was better. Dustin Brown has been gutting it out for how many years now? But there are some guys that can't do that. And the minute their speed or their scoring is gone, there's not much left.
Now, Anthony, I don't remember whether LeCavier was a 35 and over, or I think he may have said.
I think he was he was 32 when he signed. I think he was a 5-year deal. No, he definitely he was.
So he wasn't a 35 and over then, because if he signs it at 32, it pertains to the entire length of the deal.
It's when the contract is signed, not when it ends.
Right.
So, and we know the chicanery that the Flyers had to go through to get rid of that contract. So the other thing was
when Marian Hossa comes back, you'll see the chicanery in full form again.
Remember
the detergent that worked with the jersey?
What about the Pronger deal as well? I'm sure while I was away. So.
Yeah, but he never came back to play. I think Hossa's going to actually play.
Mm-hmm.
I still we have a friendly wager on that one, Russ. I don't think he's coming back, but
what is the wager on that exactly?
I don't remember, actually.
You privileged to tell on the podcast?
No, I could tell it. I don't remember it.
Yeah,
you have a friendly wager that you don't remember?
I would tell it if I knew it. I just don't remember.
I told you so.
No, I think it was like $10.
More sensitive than that.
I think it was like $10. I don't think it was anything sexy.
Now, I mean, like I said, we'll talk more about this tomorrow with Shane. But getting off of that, because I wanted to touch on this list that we saw this morning. Scott Wheeler, who does prospects for The Athletic, came out with a top 50 list of prospects. And okay, it's prospects who are 23 years or under. And I believe there was a cap in terms of how many games that the player had can have played in the NHL. A player like Morgan Frost, who was on the list, I think he was 28th, played some time in the NHL, but I think there had to be a cap of probably 40 games or something like that. I'm looking on the list here to see how many. But he lists, it was mostly players, eliminating players like Jack Hughes, who played the majority of the season, or Capo Caco, who played the majority of the season in the NHL.
Right.
The number one ranked player, and I'll go off on this, was Dylan Cousins, the first round pick of the Sabres. There's a lot of excitement about Dylan Cousins in Buffalo. It's born almost out of desperation because the Sabres organization has been searching for that number 2 center since the day after they got robbed for Ryan O'Reilly. So I understand the excitement, and I think Dylan Cousins is a good prospect. But I know nobody who has Dylan Cousins as the best prospect not in the NHL right now. And I don't understand it. I mean, do I think he's going to be a good pro? Sure. Do I think he's going to be a number 1 or a number 1 center? No. I remember last year when we were at the draft in Vancouver, Russ, that there were doubters that Dylan Cousins was an NHL center, that he projected more as a winger. Yeah. So,
I mean, honestly, there's no reason Kaprizov should be number 6 on this list because he's scoring 30 goals a year in a men's league in the KHL, and he's going to be something close to Radulov, which I do believe he will be. How could he be behind a lot of these other players? So clearly, what Wheeler's trying to do is, if you're young, then to him you've got more upside. And I'll give you a good example. He's got Bobby Brink ahead of Jack Dugan. Jack Dugan was so dominant in college hockey this year. He had 52 points in 39 games. Brink had a really nice year. He's nowhere near the level of Dugan right now, physically or otherwise, and that's because he's 3 years younger. But the idea is, it doesn't mean he's better. Right now, he's not better. And so that's where this list gets a little askew. I'll give you another good example. Putting Evan Bouchard ahead of Niels Lundqvist. Now, just because Bouchard's a first-rounder, I don't care. But Lundqvist, he actually was the best rookie in the SHL. He was the best rookie for every category, assists, everything, rookie of the year, all that. And Bouchard had a nice year, 39 points in the AHL, but that's pretty even. And so I couldn't put Bouchard that far ahead of Lundqvist based on the year. So again, I think he's going with age, and I don't think that's the right way to do it, because just because you're 18 doesn't mean you really had more upside than the 21 or 22-year-old. You might.
Yeah, I'm looking at this list here, and you're pretty much, when you're in the top 10, there's not a player that is, with the exception of Kaprizov, every one of them is 19 until you get to Nick Robertson, who's 18. And then that's when you get to Velarde and Bouchard, is when you get to the 20-year-olds in this case. And listen, I like Dylan Cousins, I agree, but I probably at the moment would have probably Caulfield at the moment, maybe a little higher, but certainly up higher than that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but what are your thoughts there, Russ? Caulfield, you probably should flip-flop Caulfield.
I would have Zegras probably over him also, wouldn't you, Russ?
Yeah.
Well, Zegras is in a decent spot. I'm with Anthony. I would flip Caulfield and Kaprizov. I would never have Kaliev that high because he's really a great goal scorer, or I'm not sure what he is. And so that's a tough one. Boldy, everybody fell in love with Matt Boldy because he had a great second half of the season. He had a crap load of assists, but I want to say he had 20 points in his first NCAA season. He didn't light it up. Now, you could say he wasn't on the greatest team, whatever, but end of the day, Matt Boldy still has a lot to prove. He had 26 points. I mean, it's a decent year for BC, but I wouldn't have him that high. But there's an age thing here. There's no question about it, and that's fine if that's what you want to go with. But Morgan Frost should be in the top 15.
Yeah.
Moritz Seider should be ahead of Bouchard and other guys because he's going to play in the NHL.
Would you have Merkley that high also?
Sorry?
Would you have Merkley that high?
No, Merkley, there's a lot of other things that you have to work out.
Yep.
For him to actually make it in the NHL. He's got all the tools, but a lot of it's mental too.
Yeah.
So,
Anthony, I was struck by all the Flyers prospects being in that within 6 or 7 picks of each other. Yeah,
he has York. Yeah, he has York at 23. And again, in terms of most recent draft pick, Frost and Brink right behind each other at 28 and 29, and then of course free agent signing Igor Zamula, who isn't even not even drafted. He's the probably I got to go through the whole list here, but he's the undrafted one, and the initial blush on that would be is Philadelphia's got really good depth and good quality depth in system, but not a star player, and I would say that's at the moment probably with the exception of Frost, who I think does have the potential, has some high end upside if he develops properly. But beyond that, it is interesting how he has them all sort of lumped in that same zone.
And Jan, they as Russ said, Lundqvist is at 16 and Vitaly Kravtsov at 35, which I thought was a slightly low. Now, obviously, Kakko, if Kakko hadn't played, as the majority of the season, probably he'd be in the top 5 or 6. But he did, so he's eliminated from the list. But I have a little bit of an issue with Kravtsov being that low.
Yeah, I mean, so first in terms of Russ's comment, right? So Lundqvist was also drafted in the first round. The difference is where he and Bouchard were taken in the first round, right? He was going with a higher pick as opposed to the lower pick in the round, right? I agree with you on Kravtsov. He probably should be higher on the list. But as we've seen, some of the names, as we discussed, a lot of those names should be moved around. A little Wallstrom at 33 is not a huge surprise, although there's still questions about him. I do like where Madden's located. I think Madden should be getting a bit more play in terms of the type of player that he is. Jake Bean, do you view him? I think Russ as being an offensive defenseman. I thought he'd be more of a defensive defenseman.
He's
guy.
an offensive defenseman.
Yeah, he had a heck of a year in the A. I mean, it was HO top defenseman of the year. So how that translates, we're going to need to see. But I mean, that's always good in terms of what his offer is potentially at the NHL level.
I just think personally, I like Krebs better than Cousins right now. That's just my personal. I like Zegras definitely better than him. That's why not having Kaprizov first and then having Cousins number 1, with there being at least 5 or 6, if not more, other guys that are probably should be rated a bit higher than him, is a surprising thing also.
Another one that's really surprising, and I just spoke to him like a week ago. Philip Tomasino is 18. He had 100 points. He had almost 50 points on 2 different teams last year, and Matt Boldy is like 7 spots ahead of him. Like it doesn't even make sense.
There's one other one I do have as well, which I find interesting. Podkolzin being 25th.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, I'll give you one.
Crazy which way, Russ.
Too high. Should be much higher. Matter of fact,
he should be higher than that.
Just making sure, because I know he's polarizing to a certain extent to some people.
I'll give you one that's even crazier, and that's and the reason is because of where he is right now in terms of his health and his career, and that's Valimaki, 26. He just had an ACL tear.
Right.
I think he was a good prospect before that happened.
He was.
But here's the thing: as a young player, there's the thing. If it's an ACL tear, I think for a player who is older, that's a different story. I think with a young player, there's always hope that there is a recovery, a quicker than maybe anticipated. Sure,
but with the question mark
down.
Right, well, exactly. With the question marks, I would think he'd probably be in the.
And that's why I thought Merkley, where he is just insane, because I think it should be 25 to 30 spots lower, given all of the other issues that he has.
I mean, I
whether or not he's going to produce on the ice in the future.
I can give you 2 players right now that I would have ranked at 26th over Valimaki, and one of them is Ty Smith, and the other one is Josh Norris. I think both of them, there are less question marks with them than with Valimaki at 26. And by the way, just because I'm going to write about this, Robertson was out either playing at the World Juniors or injured for almost 2 months, and he led the Ontario Hockey League in goals. Him at 18, being the young, I think he was the youngest guy drafted in the draft last year. Him being 10th is a joke.
I will tell you where I would have Podkolzin, because I had a chance to look at it. And if you go to my Twitter feed at Sportsology, I put him working out with Ska this morning and just what he can do. I mean, he had 8 points in the regular season in 30 games for Scott, 3 and 4 in 4 playoff games. That's with the big club. That's with the KHL. He's ahead of Kaliev. I would swap him and Kaliev out, to be honest, because Podkolzin's an excellent defender too, and he's only getting better. Where Kaliev, he just has to become a scorer, and that's going to be a tougher road for him. I think he does have physical ability too, but I do think that's a tougher road. Podkolzin's got way more skill. It's not even close, and I don't know why he's an afterthought there, but he's clearly an afterthought where he's listed because he's playing for SCA and he's playing with men. And last year he probably didn't get a ton of playing time, but this year he's going to get more. And at that age, it's impressive.
Now, that sort of leads into our discussion of the LA Kings today, some of the teams that we haven't talked about. And they have 4 players on this list. Alex Turcotte at 7, Kaliev at 8, Gabe Vilardi, who's gone through a series of injuries, at 11, I believe. Yeah, 11. And Tyler Madden, who they got in the deal for Tyler Toffoli at 37. Russ, and now they have the number 2 pick in this draft, which, they're going to get somebody. The question is who they're going to get. And we started hearing this weekend, a week after the draft lottery, because it seemed that the conventional wisdom after the lottery was it was going to be Stützle. And now all of a sudden, now Byfield, and I've even heard Drysdale's name be mentioned as a potential number 2 pick. I mean, I don't think you can really go wrong with any of them. And Russ, they're in a position where they can pick and choose who they want. That's a nice position to be at. But what do you first? Let's talk about the number 2 pick, then we'll talk about the Kings.
Well, it's interesting because I felt like they were going to explore everything, and I got that word that they were looking at everything, and they should, because they're loaded in so many different areas that they really could make a lot of different choices that would all make sense. It doesn't matter that I have Byfield ranked second and most people do, because sometimes you look at the organization and say, hey, you know what? We know Byfield's going to be a great player, but if we get this could help us even more long-term. End of the day, they probably will end up with Byfield, but that still doesn't mean they won't be open to a trade or looking at other things, because they're so jammed at the center position. If somebody made them a stupid trade, they probably would accept it, because they're doing so well right now prospect-wise that a trade that, if they got like 2 firsts and maybe a roster player of some sort, they probably make that deal. And you never know if that deal is going to come down the pike, but they're the one team that could probably do it.
Now, Anthony, right now, the Kings are in the midst of their reorganization, reset, rebuild, whatever you want to call it. And I think Rob Blake has actually done a pretty good job in terms of, he knew he probably didn't have the money to sign Jake Muzzin, so he moved Muzzin for a couple young assets and a first-round pick. They got Bjorn Foote with the first-round pick. He's going to be an NHLer. They move Alec Martinez, get a couple second-round picks. They move Toffoli. The contracts that they probably can't move are Dustin Brown and Jeff Carter, because Jeff Carter won't waive his no trade or no move. But they've been able to get young assets back, and we just talked about the young prospects that they have in the organization, and now on top of that, the number 2 overall pick. This could be a pretty quick turnaround for a team that looked old and slow a couple years ago.
It could. The key is going to be how quickly they're able to develop these players, the timing of it, whether we are going to see maybe a few lean years before we see them all sort of on that upward ascent. It depends really on who kind of the transitional players will be for LA, as well as they're trying to sort of bridge the old versus the new. And we already obviously saw a lot of that shipped out already this season with the deals that you mentioned. So I do like LA's position here if it's, in terms of the type of player that they get. And I know they've got centers in system, but I would say, Russ, it would be tough for me to pass up on Byfield.
It would, and they could, they could move someone like Vilardi to the wing or somebody else to the wing. They definitely could do that, and that's why they may still end up with them. But they really are loaded. Like, they have Turcotte.
I think that would be probably, I agree. I think a trade back in some ways, if it's really a lucrative trade deal, it's something that should be considered.
Because think about it, besides Kopitar, who we're sort of making an afterthought now, they have Turcotte, they have Kupari, they have Madden, and they have Vilardi. And, Vilardi's already up. I mean, that's a lot of centers. Even if you do move one to the wing, you still might have one too many.
Kupari, in your mind, his skill set fit as well on the wing, or no?
No, I think he's a real center, but again, it may depend on what is there.
His play style would allow him to play on the wing a little bit too.
I think he could, but I have seen him, and he's a really good center. It'll be up to Velarde and probably his back. But, he had a good start, 7 points in 10 games this year. But they're loaded. I mean, Kel Clegg will be up this year. Turcotte probably going to be up. I mean, they have 4 guys that will be up within the next 2 years.
Therefore, now defensive depth in system, you would say? How would you?
It's good. No, because here's where I think it's underrated, because the one thing Kings can do, their player development on defense, they've produced a lot of defensemen, but Bjorn Fott will be up this year, and he played great with Doughty already. Doughty didn't want to see him go, if you remember. I mentioned Clegg. There are other guys like Cole Holtz, who is in right now. He I forgot where he committed to, maybe North Dakota, a place like that. He's 3-4 years away. He's another guy that is going to be a really good defenseman for them. I'm just seeing if they have anybody else that I'm sort of leaving out here.
Michael Anderson?
Yeah, he's pretty good, actually, Anderson. That's another guy who he got some playing time, and that's the one thing about the Kings. They are able to plug in defensemen all the time. And so that's something where I don't think they're going to have to do too much to adjust on that. And I don't think they'll sign any big-name defenseman, especially with Doughty making all the money he's making. I think they'll look at other areas.
Go ahead, Jay.
So, Russ, I'll ask you guys, based upon the list, does taking Drysdale at 2 make any sort of sense, trading down to get him, bypassing any of the other guys, even though you've laid out they do have options on D? From what it looks like in the system, D is the part that they could use a mild uplift, and you can balance out compared to what you have based upon the centers and wings you have in the system.
I mean, if you're going to give me a first, and if you're Detroit and you really want you really want Byfield, and I've decided that I do want Drysdale over Byfield, I'll take your first for next year, swap positions this year, and do that deal, because I do think, it wouldn't kill them at all, and actually would put them in great position in another upcoming draft. So, but at the end of the day, the Kings, the one thing you can't overlook is if the Kings feel like they can plug Byfield in right away, that's another thing where it looks pretty good for them to sell to their fans. Like, hey, I just named you all the other names. Now we got to watch them all develop. And I don't think it's going to be an Edmonton situation because they have goaltending. So that's another thing.
Well, Brown and Carter's salaries come off the books in 2 years, which means you can probably after a year get out of it to a certain extent if you wanted to. Quick has 3 years. The question is, do you think Peterson is your goalie of the future or not? If he is, you at least have somewhat of a seamless transition moving forward based upon where you are.
Well, I mean, let's just say this. I think that next year they're probably going to at least split time, and part of that is going to be finding out whether Peterson is good enough to be the goalie you protect in the expansion draft, because Quick does not have a no-move clause on his deal, and he can be claimed in the expansion draft by Seattle.
Right.
And maybe they do it, maybe they don't, but I think that, with Peterson I think he's making less than $1 million on his contract extension. They're not going to let him go if they think even if he's a 1B, not a full-fledged number 1. Russ, just the thing was, if Detroit and them make a deal, if they do a swap, number 4 for number 2, Detroit's got 3 second-round picks, a third and 2/3 this year. I don't think they would have to give up another first to move up.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think they might. I don't think the seconds would cut it, because for me, it's like the Kings could make the argument that they could go either way. And so I think with Yzerman, you would have to blow them away with an offer to be able to make a swap. Otherwise, I think the Kings are just going to be like, fine, we'll just take Byfield. Like,
and Detroit better be pretty sure, again, in this circumstance, who they're taking, who it's going to be, whether it's Byfield, whether it's Stützle, all those type of players.
And Anthony makes a good point. Let's say, for argument's sake, that they decided, hey, we're not going to go with the star up as much as we need a goalie. We do like Byfield. We don't love Stützle. Then they have to be looking at Perfetti and Rossi and Raymond and Holtz and those guys. But Byfield is possibly a cut above all of them.
Yeah,
that's where they have to be careful.
You have to be really.
You do.
that kind of a payload that you're sending away.
Right.
Because the thing is,
pretty sure to sell that to your fan base.
That pick better be.
All those other guys are really good players. There's a chance Byfield could be a superstar, a chance, and nobody on the Detroit system or roster is a potential superstar. They don't have a guy right now.
But that pick, if they're trading their second first round pick, that pick better be like top 5 protected because
they probably
we know Detroit is not going to be good.
With a 2-slot jump and you get a couple, maybe 1 or 2 second round picks in that deal and protected first, you could sell that to the fan base for making that kind of a move.
Yeah.
No, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the Kings are not going to be a playoff team next year.
No.
But I think they could, if you compare them, and we'll talk about Anaheim, we'll talk about San Jose maybe later this week or next week. But if you compare them to the 2 other California teams, I think they have less question marks going forward because they have so many young prospects. I mean, Anaheim, they have Zegras. They have a couple other good prospects, but they're defensively their coffers are empty.
Yeah,
and they really have nothing after Gibson in terms of goaltending. And San Jose, I mean, we saw what happened this year. I don't know if it's going to get any better. I mean, they're going to need Carlson to be healthy. They've got what are they spending? $25 million on their top 3 defensemen. That's not a recipe for success.
I mean, if you think about
you're hoping that one of them is going to get claimed in the expansion draft over the next few years.
With the way the Kings ended last year, or this last, whatever you want to call it, this last season, you can make the argument that if the Kings were in the playoffs and let's say the Canadiens weren't, there's a lot of teams that would not want to face that Kings team. They were looking pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think in 2-3 years they're going to be in the playoffs. I really do.
I have to bring this up as a final note here. I just noticed this on Twitter. The Buffalo Sabres, the Pagula Entertainment Corporation, announced that they are selling the Tim Horton Donuts location at the Harbor Center.
Wow.
To another group. Now, okay, if you need an indication of the financial problems that Pagula Entertainment is having, they shut down all of their restaurants and everything around the area, obviously because with everything that's going on. This location, it's very prominent. It's right on the corner near the Harbor Center, right across from 716, which is the big sports bar, literally a block away from the arena. And the Pagulas owned it. They have sold it to some other company one day before it's reopening. I mean, I'm sorry for all this talk. Well, we're not having any financial problems. Bull crap. You are.
And Mike, if I'm not mistaken, you'll know better than me. Isn't that Tim Hortons open all the time, regardless of the rink hours?
No, it's not open to it. It's one of the very
few. 24, but it's open hours.
It's open until I think 10 o'clock at night. It's
so it's open when the rink isn't sometimes, though.
Yes.
So there's an opportunity to make really good money there, and that's surprising that they're going to give that up. So I think you're right.
Yes. So I mean.
Donuts and coffee, lack of donuts and coffee for financial strife.
It's a recipe to print money, making crullers. Come on, I don't get it. I mean, let's just say this. I think that obviously the talk has been, and remember they've hired a general manager who was a VP of business administration and and a pro scout to be their director of scouting. And the head of analytics to be the assistant director of scouting. I wonder whether any of those 3 got new contracts. And if that's the case, and they fired everybody else and they haven't hired anybody yet, this is a money-saving venture right now. They may not hire anybody until September or October when it gets closer to the draft. And honestly, with an ownership group that came in 9 years ago, basically saying throw money at the problem and buy Billy Lano and buy Christian Ehrhoff and trade for Brad Boyes. They haven't made the playoffs since, and throwing money at the problem just doesn't.
I think it's an example, like we just saw this natural gas deal die in the U.S. for like 4 states. Me as an environmentalist, I'm happy that happened. but you have to see the writing on the wall for a guy like Pegula, where that's how he makes his money, other than the Bills, and that business is flailing right now.
It's flailing, but it'll come back, Russ.
Sure, but
right.
I mean, he's going to take.
Can he survive until then? Is the question. Like every
Correct.
owner, right? And are they going to have to divest themselves of the Sabres at some point in time, or sell a piece of the Sabres because they can't afford it financially, along with the other ventures that they have?
I don't think anybody would buy a piece of the Sabres and let them have controlling interest, because they would want,
Right.
Because as good as the Bills are right now, the Bills had their Sabre moments with Rex Ryan and a few other people there, and only when they hired McDermott and Brandon Beane did things get straightened out. And coincidentally, the Pegulas have taken sort of a back seat when it came to running football operations since Beane and McDermott came in. With the Sabres, they're involved all the time.
So basically, the Bills fans are going to keep the Sabres afloat. That's what's going to happen.
It's camouflage. That's what it is. It's like the Bills are being successful. The Sabres suck. Okay, we're concentrating on the Bills, and we won't worry about the Sabres until February, when the Bills have been.
He always gets the short end of the stick.
Yep.
Right. On that note,
okay, we will be back tomorrow with Shane Malloy, old partner from Hockey Prospect Radio. I'm gonna make sure that I have Baba O'Reilly queued up.
that works for me.
Another good plural on him when he gets on.
For Anthony Mangione, for Jan Levine, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.